Good afternoon. We are ready to start our final talk. As you continue to have lunch, please, if you need to get up and go get some more refills or whatever, I want to introduce our luncheon keynote speaker, Stephen Hayes. He's CEO of what is called the Corporate Council of Africa, and it is the main organization that looks at the U.S.-Africa business relationship, as I understand it. He has been president and CEO of this council for 13 years and is engaged in almost every aspect, economic and political aspect of that relationship in this time period. He's received many awards, as you will see in the bio that's been circulated, but I wanted to highlight a few. He's been honored by the Africa Chamber of Commerce. He's been honored by the U.S. Department of Commerce with the Ron Brown Award for International Leadership, which is the department's highest award. And he's also received the award from the Africa Chamber of Commerce. The one person who got it before him was Barack Obama. So it's to give you an idea of how deeply involved Mr. Hayes has been in the affairs in Africa. I've asked him to give us sort of a broad view because we really haven't, we've touched on Africa and some of the African countries, particularly when Kareem Smadi was speaking to us about his company, but otherwise we have not gone into that region very much. And in many ways, Africa is another huge opportunity for many US companies. So I'm delighted that Stephen has come down from Washington to be with us. Thank you, Stephen. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Ramamurthy. And I hope that I can only be half as informative on Africa as you just heard from Arvin on cranberries. Extraordinary presentation. It's always tough to follow somebody like that. It was just a great presentation, though. I am President and CEO of the Corporate Council in Africa. It is the country's go-to organization on U.S. Africa, and I'll give the bona fides first and on that basis. Basically, as far as I go, I am not an economist. My graduate degree was in economics, but like most American graduates, my life has no relationship to my college degree. So it may be a little different in academics, but nevertheless, I'm more of a psychiatrist, as we have a staff of 25 with currently 12 different nationalities represented on staff. We are a primary negotiator between the U.S. government and the private sector, so a lot of my time is spent on that. And I'm also a glorified beggar in the sense that there's a lot of fundraising to be done for any nonprofit organization, which we are, and a talent scout of sorts in that a lot of our companies radar really good young staff constantly. So I'm proud that they go on to better jobs, but it's also difficult constantly to refill that, including Procter & Gamble has taken one of our staff recently as well. The Corporate Council on Africa is a group of, right now, 180 companies. They represent about 85% of all U.S. private sector investment in Africa. It's easy to verify. It's not hype or anything like that because fortunately or unfortunately, and I see it unfortunate, that about 70% of that investment's in oil. So we know right there with the companies that are invested we can go, although the oil sector represents about 8% of our total membership. But they do represent the major brunt still of U.S. investment in Africa. The membership has 20 different sectors. We're divided our staff by 8 of those sectors where our membership comes: agribusiness, health, financing, power, oil and gas, other sectors I'll come back to in a minute. But in terms of the politics, we are not a lobbying organization. We are a trade organization, but a very unusual one in that we believe that if you are going to if you want to sell to Africa, you're going to have to support the development process in Africa as well. And so we've been the lead organization on the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. I'll be glad to take any questions on that as well. It's had mixed success, but it's still the only major piece of legislation totally dedicated to Africa that the U.S. Congress has ever passed. So we have been the lead on that. President Obama, as I said, I should say our board are 30 members, and a lot of them you would recognize immediately: Procter & Gamble, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Walmart, et cetera, Motorola, Microsoft, IBM, all that. In any case, the leadership, the political leadership of the United States had been slow on policy towards Africa, but the Obama administration, I think very belatedly, came up with a policy towards Africa just 2 years ago. And it's divided into 4 sections: Power Africa, Trade Africa, Young Leaders, and something vaguely that they refer to as governance without definition. But we are designated as the lead organization, private sector organization on Trade Africa. And that is basically an East Africa initiative. I'll talk a little more about that shortly, but just in a sense, most people haven't heard of the Corporate Council on Africa, and so I'm giving you some of the bona fides. On Power Africa, which is a goal to bring electrical power to Africa, we're designated as the senior partner, and USAID is the lead government agency on that. Power Africa was created, and I think the administration has its priorities right in the sense that there isn't a country in Africa right now that's meeting its current power needs. South Africa meets 85% of its current power needs. It's actually dropped from 12%. Nigeria meets 20% of its current power needs. That's current power needs, not talking about the future. Kenya, by President Kenyatta's own admission to me, was that we in Kenya are meeting 50% of our current power needs. So this affects investment, obviously. So we are working on that. We take some of the young leaders from Africa, but we're not really a lead organization on that, nor are we involved in the governance issues, only peripherally. We do major conferences every year. Our members use us for different things. Sometimes they need a meeting with somebody they can't get in Africa, or they need a meeting at the embassy. They need us to pull together groups of people. They may need a business contact that they're having trouble getting, and so forth. And so they come to us for a number of other areas, and we also do policy documents. We have the U.S.-Africa Business Conference, which is every 2 years. It's the largest of any kind, and in terms of U.S.-Africa. In February, we did the conference in Ethiopia. Normally it's in the U.S. We did it in Ethiopia because the African Union is based in Ethiopia, and we're the only U.S. business organization that has an MOU with the African Union. We drew 1,500 people. About half were Americans, half from 50 other countries. And the purpose of that, of course, is networking, bringing businesses together. And internally, also, it's an important fundraiser for us. So it's vital to the organization, but it's also vital to U.S.-Africa relationships. We do a U.S.-Africa Infrastructure Conference every 2 years. It'll be in New Orleans in October. That brings together the key infrastructure companies, including power companies and so forth, that are interested in Africa. We also do trade missions. We do more trade missions to Africa than anyone else, including the U.S. Department of Commerce, sadly. The U.S. Department of Commerce has, I think, 2 trade missions to Africa this year. We have 8. To give you an idea of the difficulties we have on China and just U.S. business in Africa, we have 25 staff. It's multicultural. As I say, it's a nightmare managed on some days. But we have 25 staff, 11 different nationalities. The U.S. Department of Commerce has a total of, I think, 15 or 17 persons dedicated to Africa, counting the people they have on the ground. That's not good. So we are the largest organization, and we say after the Department of Commerce, that's dedicated to business in Africa, and that's only 25 people. So it gives you an idea of the challenge that American businesses have with China and others. We also are divided by working groups. as I said, health, IT, infrastructure, financing, agribusiness, security, power and energy, and oil and gas are the working groups that we have. And there's probably about 150 working groups a year at our offices in which these come together with U.S. government people and probably have more public-private meetings than almost anywhere in Washington as a result of this. Recently, we acquired the Africa Travel Association, which is I shouldn't say the largest, it's the oldest travel organization between U.S. and Africa. We acquired it because we think they came to us, first of all. It wasn't a hostile takeover. They came to us. Basically, tourism offers an enormous opportunity business-wise. And what tourism in Africa, it's just the opportunities are just unlimited. But if you're lacking infrastructure, if you're lacking roads, you're lacking ports, you're lacking electricity. So we felt that this was a great marriage because these are the issues we address. And if we can start bringing that together, we can start making a difference economically as well as for investors. So, and we're currently negotiating with the research organization who's also approached us about coming under us. So that's the bona fides for the Corporate Council on Africa. We are an imperfect organization, as we all are, but nevertheless, we are very deeply committed to Africa. I should also say that on awards, we're the only organization that has won, a business of any kind in the United States has won or been awarded, I should say, it's not a contest, but been awarded the highest individual award that the government can give, which is the Ron Brown Award. But we also were awarded this past 2015, the President's E Award for Excellence, which goes to businesses. Was started by President Kennedy, awarding businesses as the highest award that they can give. So we were the only Washington, D.C. organization or entity that got that this past year. It's, again, I suppose you'd see it as boasting, but we're very proud of it. And the fact that we're the only entity of any kind that's had both the corporate and individual award is something that drives us on. So let me turn to Africa then, and the challenges and the opportunities. I went back and forth on this last night, earlier, to coming up on the plane. I have a lot of mixed feelings about investing in Africa. I'm not necessarily a cheerleader. I think it's in our national interest. I think that the opportunities are great for businesses, and it's very, very difficult, and it's very challenging. There's no doubt about it. And again, just on the power alone, if a country, most countries aren't even meeting 50% of their power needs. But that limits investment. Africa can grow very rapidly, but when it hits that threshold that you don't have any more power, then growth stops. And that's what in part is Africa is going through right now. So that's why I think that President Obama had the right initiative, that Power Africa is something that needs to happen. It's happening very, very slowly, though. By 2030, the African continent will be home to as many as 2 billion people, including 175 million living in urban clusters of 5 million, of cities of 5 million or more. So do your division on that and just the enormous growth. And as I say, we've already reached for the first time in history where more Africans live in cities than they do in the countryside and the villages. And that's just going to continue. So there's going to be large urban masses, which the optimists will say presents great opportunity, and the pessimists say that's going to be a major problem. Without schools, without jobs, it's going to be a major issue unless we address that. You've already heard how investment in developing emerging markets that's gone down in the last 5 years. Africa's no different. Some of them have taken major drops. South Africa particularly would be one good example. And I do have the figures country by country if any of you want to ask about that later. The traditionally strong economies that you would expect, South Africa, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, Zambia, which were all touted 5 years ago as the future, have all been hard hit by the slump in commodity prices especially. Economies depending heavily on extractive industries have suffered the most in Africa. Countries faring best are smaller economies such as Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Kenya, where the numbers have held very steady. Ghana has long been thought of as a great investment opportunity. The corruption factor there is growing heavily. It's still slightly on the upbeat, but it's becoming a much more difficult place to invest. So things are changing. It's a constantly shifting environment in Africa. And like anywhere else, if you're going to invest, you have to do your homework first. You can't just walk in and expect quick returns. It's a long time. We also have been very high at times on Mozambique, which now perhaps has more gas reserves than anywhere else in the world now been discovered. Some of our companies like Anadarko are investing there, but the corruption factor has been an impediment, and that's got to change as well. Otherwise, the potential there is just enormous. Not simply in oil and gas, tourism, agriculture. Mozambique is another one of the countries that could feed much of the world if you really started to develop that. The Democratic Republic of Congo has just recently lost to China. One of the largest single investment in Africa, U.S. investment in Africa other than oil, has been the Freeport-McMoRan copper mine in DRC. That's been purchased by China, so Freeport-McMoRan is no longer engaged in that. And so you'll see our trade figures drop because that's $5 billion a year. But so you ask, is Africa a good place to invest? And again, it's mixed. It's country by country. The continent overall has experienced an overall growth of 4.5%, which is a good return on investment. North Africa is still recovering from I thought it was a brilliant piece of foreign policy, the Arab Spring. But nevertheless, that's going to be a problem for a while. The oil producers of Algeria, Angola, Nigeria, and Sudan have all seen major drops, which are threatening their economy and stability. Growth in manufacturing, which is badly needed in Africa, has also been very low, about 4.3% from 2010 to estimated 2015. 2015 figures are still estimates. But nevertheless, the population growth is big, which I think, again, plus or minus, depending on how it is handled and managed. Great opportunity. Urban expansion and household consumption has grown 4.2% over the last 5 years to $1.3 trillion in 2015. So there is a huge potential market. The middle class is growing. McKinsey says that African consumers will be spending $2 trillion by 2025. And in Nigeria alone, which we are still very big on in terms of investment destination, aside from oil, counts for about 30% of Africa's growth. It also we're seeing more of the diaspora return to Nigeria than almost any other country in Africa. It's drawing entrepreneurs, it's drawing young people back to the country. The ICT acceleration in African economies has also transformed, especially East Africa's business landscape. The emergence of M-Pesa and other mobile payment methods are ubiquitous everywhere in Kenya. It's often easier to pay a bill there than it is in the United States on credit cards. So there's a lot of very positive things, and then smartphones have just jumped landlines where it's no longer needed. The cell phone industry is absolutely huge and still growing in Africa. So, the future, the fall of the price of oil and other commodities has impacted finance, no doubt about it. More countries now, financing is very hard to get. It's very hard for an American company to get financing. I doubt if any of you can name more than one bank, because there's only one bank, that's a U.S. bank, that's doing anything on Africa right now, and that's limited. And XM is essentially closed to investment right now, thanks to our Congress. And so it's if you're going to invest, if you're going to find financing, you're probably going to have to go to China, as some of our companies have, or you're going to go to Europe to get financing at higher rates. So that's another issue that is not simply an Africa issue, it's an American issue as well. It's a major impediment. So anyway, in a nutshell, the slowdown is not necessarily a crisis, but merely, I think, in historical terms, especially given infrastructure development, predictable on Africa. I don't think it's something to worry about as much as seeing it as an opportunity, especially in infrastructure, especially in power development, the hotel industry, and so forth. By the way, when we took over the Africa Travel Association, we automatically got their membership also, which includes Marriott, Hilton, Delta, Starwood, several others. So the hotel industry is now really starting to gear up towards, and with the hotel industry, then there's the food industry, there's the infrastructure that has to be built around that. You have to at least 25,000 miles of coastline that's basically uninhabited, unused, spectacular. Every country has enormous assets that just haven't been tapped in tourism. So with that, then we think that could be an enormous development tool and an advantage for the United States as well. We do think, as others have already stated, who are much more knowledgeable than I, that 2016 is going to be a better year for investment in Africa. But there are reasons to worry. Growth in the emerging market economies has slowed, as we all know, but commodity boom is down. Trade deteriorated in 36 out of the 48 countries this past 5 years. 8 countries, including Angola and Nigeria, have derived 90% of their income from oil. So when you look at that, imagine what that how that affects a country. So they've got to diversify, and in fact, both countries are trying to do that very belatedly now. I've already addressed the limits of electrical power and financing. Geopolitically, there's also issues that we're going to have to face. Russian tensions with Turkey are going to have a surprising effect. Turkey is becoming one of the largest investors now in Africa. If, in fact, the Russian-Turkish tensions, the Middle East issues affect Turkey more and more, you're going to see a withdrawal to some extent of Turkey investment into Africa. And their investment is huge, especially in construction. Related to that would be the threat of ISIS as well. The economic sanctions on Russia, Russia's becoming a larger investor. If the sanctions extend to what they're doing with Africa, then that's going to have an effect on the African economy. Very little on us, but it's going to have an effect on Africa. How Nigeria deals with its own version of terrorism, and Boko Haram's another issue. If Nigeria goes positive, so will most of West Africa. If it goes the wrong direction, then so goes West Africa. So you have all those tensions going. The Kenya elections, South Africa is having a political crisis, and U.S. investment is absolutely flat. Some of you can name some going in, but overall the total investment is flat in South Africa of U.S. We used to be the second largest investor in South Africa. We're no longer that. So all those are going to affect. Yet, what's important to know is that Africa does hold huge promise. The market size, Cote d'Ivoire is the second fastest growing economy in Africa now. Ethiopia is by far the largest, an extraordinary opportunity for investment. And Ethiopia, according to some figures, Ethiopia is going to be the largest country in Africa population-wise by 2050. We'll see. But nevertheless, it's the second largest market. It's a market very friendly to the U.S. It's a difficult country, though, for private sector. So we work with companies. We have staff on the ground in Ethiopia and Kenya and Nigeria to work with that, by the way. So I would say there are also the pioneering new technologies. There's a entrepreneurial class in Africa that I think is probably one of the top entrepreneurial classes coming now. Some very, very bright young business leaders coming in throughout Africa, especially in East Africa and Nigeria, which I know is West Africa. But there's just a lot of potential, but you're going to have to dig in and go for the long term. We have a lot of small businesses among our members too. They come in, they expect a quick hit in a year or two, and we say if you're coming in to join CCA and you're only spending, see what you can do in a year, you're wasting your money. It's going to take some time. Africa is built on relationships more than I think almost any place in the world. You have to build the relationship person to person. You have to start to develop and really do your groundwork. So the 6 reasons I would say to invest in Africa: they need infrastructure badly. This is something the U.S. can provide. They need housing badly. The intra-Africa trade, as Procter & Gamble knows, is enormously important, and so that's why Procter & Gamble is investing in, who's also on our board, investing in Kenya, investing in building a plant in Nigeria. They're already in South Africa. They're seeing this as a huge market, as is Walmart. Walmart entered Africa in a different way. They just bought out a major supermarket chain that was throughout Africa. And they're working hard on that too. So the point is, for consumers, as you heard from Ocean Spray and others, the potential from consumers is just enormous. You didn't talk about Africa, but it exists in Africa as well. And the population is almost as large as China's. But the difference is you have 54 different entities in Africa as opposed to one large entity in China. So we expect the markets again to grow. We think that the slowdown will affect some, but coming back. The risks are typically greater in Africa and in emerging markets than they are other places. The legal, the political, and economic structures all have to be understood and worked with. And you have to do your due diligence very, very carefully. You have to understand the political climate that you're entering. And it takes time to do the right research. We can help on that, by the way. I'm not so much selling CCA, but that's one of the things we do is quick turnaround on research as well. So finally, since you have China here as well, let me also just quickly address that. That's what I call the bogeyman for a lot of people. They say, well, China's doing this and this, and yeah, China is doing this. They don't have the same rules. They're doing it very differently and entering the market and challenging in very different ways. I think the Chinese role in Africa has been, till now, very, very positive. In fact, that if China had not entered Africa to the extent it had, I don't think we would have picked up the same interest. We could have been doing this years ago, and we weren't doing it. So I don't blame China for entering and seeing an obvious market and doing something about it. They have a better planning system, obviously, that works to their advantage. They can put packages together very quickly that we can't. If you're going in and trying to put a package, you've got to get other American companies, sell them on the same idea. China's got a quick advantage. They've got financing also. But nevertheless, it's an important market for the future. I think it's very important to U.S. national security that we continue to build the relationship with Africa. It's a challenge, but it's also, the cliche, it's the next emerging market. Well, yes, it is. There's no doubt about it. So the question is for American businesses and the American government is China, are we going to be in Africa? Are we going to leave it to China and others? And I think it is by far in our national interest in terms of cultural heritage, cultural identities, political economies, 54 different nations, and our economy, which can't stay in place when the rest of the world is moving forward. Our economy must be engaged with Africa. So this is what we're doing. The China role is, I think, problematic at times because of we follow OECD rules. China, India, others don't have to. The transparency issue, I think the poaching is one of the great crimes of humanity, frankly, that's happening, and that's largely, but not exclusively, goes back to China. And what's happening to the whole heritage of Africa in terms of poaching, in terms of wildlife, in terms of potential for tourism is just beyond tragedy. And that's got to be stopped. But we haven't found a balance in our policies yet, and we need to. So I'll be glad to take any questions. Thank you.
about a year ago, I ran a conference in Washington, D.C. on doing the deal in Africa, which was sponsored by CCA. And I found that generating interest from large American firms was actually fairly difficult. I mean, there were many private equity firms that came and many smaller firms that came. So in light of your comments about the competition from other parts of the world, the Chinese, for example, do you see that our American firms, is it increasing at all, their activity, or is it staying the same and going down?
I think it's increasing. It's hard to get exact figures on that. I think there's a lot of interest in private equity firms, and that's one of our growth areas in membership, by the way. But the reality is that they still haven't, for instance, Carlyle has a huge fund now in Africa that they still haven't really used or tapped into. It's trying to find the right places. I think the one that you were referring to was aimed at private equity firms, though, too. But
they were included in the conference.
Right.
The topic was doing the deal in Africa.
Oh, yes, right.
And we actually had some people from Power Africa for speak as well, but that was the result. It was difficult to get.
It is difficult. We get our power is the convening power. That's why the U.S. government uses everybody else. At least we have sort of a trust thing. But it is very hard. Large companies already tend to go, and anybody can correct me, but large companies tend to go on their own. They don't go looking for partners necessarily. I don't know what your experience is, but look, they do their business. They don't need it unless they need financing. But the smaller companies have to have those partnerships. So you're just simply, more and more, if you're going to invest in Africa, you're going to have a partner on the ground that you can trust. And that's another thing we work with. We're the only U.S. organization that has an MOU with the AU. We work with the various, what we think are legitimate business organizations in Africa, partnering up. But it's challenging. There's no way to avoid that.
Hi, Darnley Howard. Thanks for your comments. Can you talk a little bit more about how American business is perceived in Africa?
Well, I mean, I would say that's the same thing as asking what's Africa think. The thing is, there's not any one business model. I mean, there's the small businesses, large businesses, and so forth. Generally, though, the question that I get all the time is, why isn't America here? I don't think it's perceived as negatively or positively. The issue is, why aren't they here? Well, in some way, there's reasons for that on the Africa side, and unfortunately, there's probably just a number of reasons on the American side. The time, the investment, the lack of financing, the lack of support from the U.S. government, which is just, I think, abysmal, disappointing, everything else. There's no excuse for that. Africa has been, the reality is Africa hasn't been a priority for this country. And I think it's becoming more now, economically. And, I hope whoever is the next president really looks at that carefully. I think the case has been disappointing so far. I think, let me also say, I think that the U.S. is perceived as very positively overall, and hence the disappointment in not having more U.S. investment in Africa. But the rules of the game are different too, country by country. But the reality is we could do much better. Okay.
Last question.
I am a student from MS program here in the Northeastern. Thank you for coming today. My question is, how do you see the correlation between the economy of China and Africa? Are they going to the same direction in the following years?
It's interesting. I spent a lot of time in China in the 1980s and a lot more time in the old Soviet Union, 1990s, and a lot more time in the old Soviet Union in the 1980s. I compare African countries more to what I saw in the Soviet Union in the 1980s and 1990s. And that the models of government because of Cold War, were based more on the old Soviet style, and the transitions of what happened in the Soviet Union after the collapse of the country is very similar to a lot of what's happening in a lot of the African countries. In terms of China and the correlation, I think it's because of China that you're seeing the boost in development, frankly. And it's not following China's model as so much. And there's very few countries that are following a Chinese model. When I met with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, what was it, last late fall, I said, well, you know, you're basing your economy on China. He said, no, we're not. We're basing our economy on the South Korean model. China is helping us in our model. So on the positive side, I see China is absolutely vital to African development right now. I don't think I really got your question, but it's the best I can do right now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.